Welcome to Lecture 4 on Existentialism and Christian Faith for the fall 2025 semester for AEU. Let's start with prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the fourth lesson or lecture on this subject as we continue to probe into what you are doing in the world. God, open our hearts and our mind that we may understand, Lord. In Jesus' name. Amen. Well, let's go to our book, the textbook, and page 20. We're going to try to actually briefly talk about some of the issues. As a matter of fact, I may just skim because you could actually read, and I don't want to, I just want to give you kind of a big picture. So, Aristotle and formation of character. Aristotle, like Plato, with its emphasis on abstract forms, turned his attention to the practical realities of daily life. In his Nicomachean Ethics, he argues that the ultimate goal of human existence, what he calls eudaimonia, often translated flourishing or well-being, is achieved not by theoretical knowledge alone, but through the cultivation of moral virtues such as courage and justice. So what is he saying? Well, he's saying that human flourishing, true human flourishing, is attained through not through abstract theory. So in a way, like Plato is all abstract, ideology, the idea, saying that no, there's got to be a moral virtue in daily life. So path to eudaimonia is moral virtues, daily practice that actually he's more, in a sense, practical. Well, what about stoic interiority and roots of emotional mastery? Now, it is a simple, as I'm going to continually emphasize, it is a simplified version. If you did study this in more extended way, please, I apologize because what I'm trying to do is set the stage. So bring in Kierkegaard. And before I bring in Kierkegaard, I'm going to talk about how the difference between East and the West at a perceptual level, at epistemological level, how we perceive the reality different and gets actually played out in our language. And I'm going to set the stage how the world was ready, the Western world was ready for someone like Kierkegaard to come along and actually talk more of the Eastern way of thinking. So existentialism is more Korean or more Asian way of understanding reality. I'll get to that. So in order to do that, I'm not studying Stoics. I'm not studying Plato. I'm not studying Aristotle. I'm just setting the stage. Okay. So Stoic teachers such as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius flourished during the Hellenistic era, offering a powerful reminder that genuine freedom depends less on external circumstance and more on how we govern our inner lives. Can't even say it, famously put it this way: it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgment about them. By shifting attention from the uncontrollable event to the interpretation we place on them, we discover a new kind of liberty, one rooted in self-mastery rather than external fortune. So, Stoic teaches how do you achieve that? Well, focus on inner control for freedom. The Aristotelianism emphasizes on moral practice for flourishing. So there is kind of contrast. What about Augustine? Turning to the early church, Augustine of Hippo echoes existential longing when he writes, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." So historically, we are beginning to find this kind of internal restlessness, the existential longing. Augustine basically teaches that our deepest anxiety, Now the key terms are popping now. Anxiety and those things that Kierkegaard will pick up later stem from heart restless for the divine. In his confession, he famously confesses, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." This inner restlessness reveals a mind directed, misdirected love, a longing that only God can satisfy. Where classic philosophers spoke virtue or rational mastery, Augustine points us toward love that seeks fulfillment in the creator rather than it's in the created. So Plato, Aristotle, those guys talking about concept and theory, and Augustine is now talking about this anxiety of not being connected with God. So how do you find God as a source of peace? Augustine teaches that true peace comes not from virtue or reason alone, as was argued like Plato and Aristotle, but from directing our deepest longing toward God, the only source of lasting rest. You see how it works? The Stoic, they said freedom by inner mastery of freedom. Augustine find peace not in those things. It's got to be weighted out. I think I'm going way too fast, but maybe I could backtrack. So if you, and so actually, if it's something that interests you and said, I want to actually study that in the context of existentialism, please do that. Do that research. You could even do independent research and then actually incorporate it into your paper. So, okay, the rise of human subjectivity, page 23. Across these Western tradition, we see the gradual emergence of subjectivity, a turn inward that recognizes self as both a knower and an agent of its own life. Hmm. First, Plato's cave allegory highlights our fundamental need for enlightenment beyond mere appearances. The prisoner who mistakes shadow images for reality embody every soul bound by surface impression, calling us to pursue the true light that reveals our deepest selves. I think I think yesterday, the last lecture, there was some kind of power failure or the internet flipped, was off and then on, and I kind of panicked. And we're talking about Plato, but not fully covered. This is the Chat GPT version of I told them I put in the story. Well, what's Plato's cave allegory? It talks about how they only saw the shadow, they're all chained, they only saw shadow of what's real out there. It only took that person to be out in reality, come back and try to convince. So Plato's cave allegory teaches that true freedom begins when we turn from surface illusion to seek the deeper reality that enlightens the soul. Okay. So this will be sort of like description. This will be more teaching illustration. So you need to turning away, describe to seek deeper truth, and seeking reality, actively pursuing true knowledge, and sense of enlightenment comes, achieving profound understanding. Enlightenment, not in Buddhist enlightenment, just revelation or realization. Like, oh my gosh, I realize what reality, true reality is. Or I thought, well, what about this way? Same thing, uh, the illustration from illusion to enlightenment, the shadow world. You're trapped in this deceptive appearance. It's just a worm, and you need to break up free from, escape the cave's confines. And then, as you question and perceive reality, the true freedom of you fly and you see enlightened reality. So it doesn't matter how you want to perceive. That's a way to describe kind of a Platonic idea. Now, um, And then let me jump into little Platonic idea of what knowledge is. The Plato, knowledge is a subset of that which both true and believed. That's his proposition. What is truth, or what is knowledge, or what is uh, it's not philosophy. What is, oh, it's a graphic. Okay. So, what is knowledge? Well, when belief and truth come together, or we teach that in epistemology. What is knowledge? How do you know when belief coincides with the truth? That's what knowledge is. So, the Renaissance discoverers of ancient Greek thinkers, Plato, taught that mathematics and observation key to learning the truth, laws about the nature. And Francis Bacon and René Descartes challenges that assumption and determined that truth can only be found and investigated process or using the scientific method. So Plato says, Plato taught that mathematics and observation key to learning the truth or the law about the nature. Rene Descartes primarily says, no, no, you need to challenge that assumption and determine that truth can only be found after investigative process. Guess what we follow now? Of course, Descartes, because the science was not built on Platonic idea and rationalism of Descartes. I think, therefore I am. So according to Plato, knowledge is a subset of that which both true and believed, or truth or reason. According to Aristotle, knowledge is a subset of that which is both true and reasonable. So according to Plato, knowledge is subset of that which is both true and believed. According to Aristotle, knowledge is a subset of that which is both true and not belief, but reasonable. Okay, sounds like Descartes too, isn't it? In the period between his two stays in Athens, between his times at the Academy of Plato, Aristotle conducted most of the scientific thinking and research for which he is renowned today. In fact, most of Aristotle's life was devoted to the study of objects of natural science. And of course, he made a lot of wonderful discoveries, and he also made a lot of mistakes. So in terms of Plato and Aristotle, particular was less real, substance is transitory, form is static, fear of change, found academia, and his mystic, he belittler of natural science, math, highest form of thinking. Well, Aristotle, on the other hand, was universe was less real, substance needed matter, true nature evolves, change inevitably to progress, founded his own school. He was a logician, observer of natural science. He separated math and science. So well, Socrates says, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. This actually is a section that I used for teaching metaphysics at Royal University of Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And as I taught metaphysics, um, the, 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 the biggest challenge for me to teach in Cambodia is that traditionally, for 6,000-year history, and also Buddhism being this prominent thinking process, and especially they did not train their monks to think critically. Rather, they have them repeat the chanting in the language that they're not even familiar with. It was basically the Hinduistic chanting what do you call that? So when I first taught, one of the student has been a Buddhist monk for 10 years. And when I start challenge them to think, and the key word I used was Hebrew, Matahoshev, which means in Hebrew, what do you think? And actually, I spent my first 3 hours lecture asking just that question, Matahoshev, what do you think is truth? And oh, well, according to Plato, I said, no, I don't care about what Plato said. What do you think truth is for you? Well, according to Buddha, I said, no. Why are you keeping on talking about Buddha and Plato? What do you think is truth for you? So it was trying to draw out the critical thinking from them. I remember a few ladies toward the end start weeping, crying. I said, "We came to learn, and why you keep on asking us questions?" I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. I guess that's what I'm trying to do with this class too. I gave you a little guide, and it's a very short guide. And so what I want you to do is instead of trying to learn, oh, who is Plato? And then I have to dump all the information here, which is kind of oxymoron nowadays. Why would I write who Plato is in my little book? Uh, that's something that you need to do on your own. Who is Aristotle? Who is Socrates? Who is Kierkegaard? And so that's will be my goal. So let's put it all together. The true faith is not merely about mastering ideas, but about transforming the self by seeking truth beyond appearances, as Plato said, aligning our desire with God, Augustine, cultivating virtue through habits, Aristotle, and governing our inner life with clarity and resilience, like Stoics. So I am now mentioning not anything against, but all that was beneficial to set the stage for existentialism to merge. That's the only point I'm making. Cultivating virtue through habits and governing our inner life and clarity with resilience, the Stoics, these foundations prepare us for Kierkegaard's challenge to embrace truth not just intellectually, but with wholeheartedly lived faith. So, what is true faith? Is lived out faith. As Kierkegaard famously said, life is not a problem to be solved, but reality to be experienced. And so that's where we're going to go. So path to true faith is seeking the truth, aligning desires, cultivating virtue, governing the inner life, and embracing the truth, and embracing the truth by taking the leap of faith. I should draw a little embracing the truth and then have someone took a leap of faith. Well, Martin Buber will teach that authentic selfhood arises only in genuine encounter, meeting God and neighbor as thou rather than treating them as object of it. In this way, the inward focus of Western philosophy mature into existential vision, where the self actively engages with truth and relationship. So Jesus resurrects, Jesus said, I need to go, goodbye. And then, the whole church history. And for 1,800 years, dominated by West and their understanding and their language, English, French, German, and they're doing their own philosophy in their own language. And what happens is that they're feeling, wow, we pursue all this different philosophy, but there seems to be emptiness. What is that we're seeking? And that's where existentialism sets in. See, Martin Buber teaches that true selfhood emerges through genuine relational encounter, revealing that we become fully human through authentic mutual presence, essence of true self. The emergence of true selfhood from genuine encounter, authentic mutual presence, being fully present with others, not using others, manipulating. Read that book, I and Thou. And then you really, I did not make that as required reading, but only the man who makes freedom real to himself meets destiny. Only the man who makes freedom real to himself meets destiny. And that's pretty. And why we could meet our destiny? Because God created us, everyone, according to his image. That's why Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, have you been to the musical? At least maybe saw a movie. But when you go to a musical in England, and I watch Les Mis in America and England, I think 18 times, the musical 18 times, just beautiful musical. The last line is this: to love another is to touch or to see the face of God. Mm. To love another person is to see the face of God. Mm. So profound. Okay, then what is the implication? Now, this is the more of the important, juicy part. What is the implication for our ministry? Holistic formation follows from this awareness. Virtue ethics teaches that character is shaped through the practice habits. Stoicism equips us to find inner peace amid life storms. Augustine reminds us that true freedom and rest come only through God's transforming love. Eastern mindfulness opens space to notice God's presence in every moment. Together, these strands offer powerful tools for discipleship, helping believers grow not only in correct theology, but in embodied character, emotional maturity, and spiritual depth. So now you kind of got it, right? I'm not covering paragraph by paragraph. I expect you to read it and then actually respond. There are You need to write a two-page response. Choose one or the other. Western foundation. Which ancient thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, Stoics, or Augustine, speak most powerfully to your own spiritual journey? So if none did, then move on to next. But if it did, well, go ahead. I mean, it's only 1.5 page. I mean, required is 1.5, but I'm saying 2 page. Describe a specific shadow or restless longing in your life that how their insight invites you toward gospel-centered response. Okay. You could use that, or you could actually use this one, East-West integration. How might a practice drawn from Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, example, mindfulness, simplicity, ritual hospitality, enrich your personal devotion or church community while remaining anchored in God's lordship? This is important, very important. People, the Westerners, came to Buddhist world, Taoist world, Confucian world, and they try to remove, and we cannot do that. We need to live in their world, but bring the gospel, and then gospel becomes like a bomb that explodes, but keeps the virtue, the good things of that particular faith, right? Um, For example, Korea, when faith came, they got the gospel, but then they interpreted according to Korean way of lifestyle, understanding. Early morning prayer is one of them, right? Now, Korean missionaries should never come to Cambodia and say, well, early morning prayer work for Koreans, so that's what you need to do. They may not work. So let's take 5-minute break. Okay. Well, this one actually need more than, I'm going to give you 15-minute break. So let's take 15-minute break and respond to that. 15 minutes. Okay. Did you write something? Please Do not wait until 90-minute lecture is over because you are going to forget. You're not that smart. Nobody is. I forget what I taught after teaching 90 minutes. So if the teacher forgets, of course, one who's just listening, you're going to forget. So make sure you took the 15-minute, wrote something. So post all your questions in AU wall, and I'm going to answer during our Zoom meetings. Before we can leap into faith, I told you about taking a leap from to be real faith, we must first feel the ground shake beneath our certainties. Every time you are certain about anything, well, you don't need faith. Well, you're absolutely certain. So the whole anxiety is something that we need because we don't have anxiety when we are absolutely certain. So anxiety is not necessarily evil thing. It is just part of the process. So let's go to the modern doubt to existential question, the birth of existence. So that's why chapter 2 continually talked about this is what Plato, this is what Aristotle, this is what Augustine, everybody talked about. Try to find virtue, truth in an abstract concept. And Augustine said, I just feel uncertain. There's something missing. What is that? Well, go to chapter 3 of this particular book. I don't know the page number, but I start writing. When I was 19 years old, philosophy major, I wrote my final paper for the History of Modern Thought course as a direct critique of René Descartes' radical rationalism. I argued, perhaps naively, that placing cogito ergo sum at the foundation of philosophy threatened to undermine the very heart of Christian faith. If existence truly precedes essence, then reason alone would not become our ultimate judge, and belief would shrink into mere intellectual assent. So instead of in that form, let me tell you a story. So I went and studied philosophy in my college years, and I was writing a paper, and I was taking a Descartes class, actually. It wasn't postmodern, history of modern thought, but what happens? I was reading, and Descartes, in his sixth meditation, talks about how he was, I think, was really sick or something, and he was warming himself in cold winter day, and he lapsed into kind of this world where he start asking, what about these poor people who cannot even, they cannot believe they, for the life of them, they try, but they just cannot believe. So how can I build a system that will bring people to God in a reasonable way? So he considered rationalism sort of like a ladder to reach God. And so he said, well, if we cannot believe, and then why don't we start doubting everything? And we're going to doubt everything. And then he says, but cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The fact that I am thinking when I doubt, because doubting is a part of the thinking process, the fact that when I doubt that I'm thinking, then I know that I have a being that doubts or thinks. So he famously said in Latin, cogito, I think, ergo I sum, am. I think, therefore I am. Well, but long before I had learned Kierkegaard's term leap of faith, I sensed intuitively that making Christianity believable on a Cartesian terms risked stripping it of its defining paradox. I believe because it's absurd. In my youthful conviction, I insist that faith anchored in the unbelievable, trusting a God who stooped at a dwelling among us, could not survive a logic that demanded coherence above all else, because existence precedes essence. Now, Kierkegaard didn't say that. Sartre said that, but that's what Kierkegaard was going at. Right? Who is this Rene Descartes? He launched the radical rethink of how we would anything by subjecting every belief to doubt. I already told you that. He famously resolved that anything which could not be doubted, even scripture, tradition, or the evidence of senses, must be discarded until only what is absolutely certain remains. So 1596 to 1650 was 200 plus years before Kierkegaard famously launched a rationalism. That single unshakable foundation turned out to be the awareness of one's own thinking, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. In stark every in starking every staking everything on this insight, Descartes made the thinking self center of philosophical inquiry, in inaugurating the modern subject as the ultimate ground of certainty. Wow. Kind of think about that. Let that sink in. Yet, this brilliant maneuver introduced a profound theological tension. Although Descartes ultimately reintroduced God as the guarantor of our clear and distinctive ideas, his radical emphasis on individual cognition had already set the self at a distance from lived relational experience of divine. So my paper argued that the greatest evil man in philosophical world was Descartes. And of course, professor of Rene Descartes hated my paper, gave me horrible grade, and I went and argued with him. And he said, "How dare you say that Descartes was the evilest man?" I said, "I believe if Descartes was alive today, he'll be atheist, he'll be rationalist, arguing against presence, the existence of God. The only he did that because he did not believe in God, but he want to make sure that the path that he create will create more atheists, and that's what rationalism did. That's what rationalism did. Because faith, by definition, is believing is what is observed. I believe because it's unbelievable. I don't believe because it's believable. If I believe because it's believable, it's not faith, it's an agreement. But Descartes tried to make agreement faith. And that's why in reverse way, I'm saying, wow, that was a pretty evil man. Because if he actually wrote what he wanted to write, that in that time he would have been burned at stake because he would be going against church. So it is precisely this sense of God's absence or remoteness that Soren Kierkegaard would later diagnose as an existential crisis, showing how the modern I can become unmoored when it's tried to stand alone, even in matters of faith. The Kierkegaard saw it right through. So about 200 years later, Kierkegaard writes, so what is knowledge? What is knowledge? And Kierkegaard says, faith, knowledge, true understanding comes by understanding paradox, overcome, embrace, accept. Paradox. What is paradox? So, paradox is something that goes against, in our mind, something called axiomatic truth. Axiomatic truth is not truth, but axiomatic means we decided to call it truth. We agreed to call it truth. Not that it is truth, we agreed to call it truth. What is that? Logically, the philosophers argue that X cannot be X and not X at the same time. It's called axiomatic truth. So what is axiomatic truth? That's it. You just saw. X cannot be X and not X at the same time. So is God same as man? No. God is not man and man is not God. Because X, God, let's say God is X and not X, which is man, at the same time. So therefore, God cannot be man, God cannot be God, and be man at the same time. According to Western axiomatic truth, they decided, they agreed, that's how we're going to think or perceive the world. So logical conclusion based on axiomatic truth. If God cannot be man and Jesus is man, then Jesus cannot be God. Do you follow the logic? And whether you like it or not, if you are taught in Western world, you've subscribed to that symbolic logic or axiomatic truth, then that's in your head. Okay. Either or logic. God cannot be man. Jesus is man. Jesus cannot be God. So that's in your brain constantly. So before Abraham, I am, right? So Jesus said, I am God. But in your mind, you say, oh, that cannot be true. How could man be God? How could man be God? So you keep on confessing, I want to believe, I want to believe, I want to believe. It's such an incredible thing for Western people to believe that Jesus, a man, was God. Okay? Encountering God in context of ideology and concept. It's a paradox. It cannot be done. Okay? What is a paradox? The red button says the blue button is true. The blue button says the red button is false. Huh? That's called paradox. Now, some missionary came to Korea and tell this Korean lady in the village somewhere, Jesus, who is God, came to us as a man. And she says, oh, thank you so much. She doesn't have this, what? How can, you know, how could that be? But what about Western people? That's Western Union side. Western answer, you know, huh? How could it be? Man can, if Jesus was man, Jesus cannot be God, right? And then the Western people said, ah, that grandma, because she's uneducated and does not understand. Do you think that's what's happening? Do you think because she's ignorant that she just accepts that Jesus, who was man, came to us, but he was God? Thank you very much. No. The real answer is I subscribe to both and paradigm. Her world evolves around. I mean, Korean flag, watch this. Korean flag is made of yin and yang, the light and darkness commingle. So for her, uh, why can't man named Jesus be God? And God be man? There's no contradiction in a sense. So the axiomatic truth, God cannot be man, it doesn't exist in her the perspective. So this whole either or logic, she just, it's like that's not how I process reality. Okay? So she tells me, Bob, explain this context epistemological, existential epistemology. So both and logic, all this contradiction, and this is something I worked out in my PhD, and I cannot get to it in details. But from existential epistemological perspective, both contradiction and paradox are part of its whole. Okay? So when we look at positivism, interpretivism, inductive, deductive, ethic, emic, And I had to draw that graphic. And if you're really interested, I could send you the whole section on that later. But um, I was discovering as I was doing research in Cambodia, and I lived in America for a long, 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 long time. But it took me many years away from America, live in Cambodia for many years, turned into decades. And then, of course, I go back and my upbringing since 12 was in Asia or Korea. From 12 on was in America, all the way up to higher level education to grad level, PhD in Oxford Center for Mission Study, at Fuller, at Berkeley, and just all this mixing. But finally, I had to be out of US, talking to more Asians and dialogue and realize, wow. And so I could embrace paradox instead of arguing. Um, it I told you that I had to live in Cambodia to really come to that. One time I was in Cambodian village and there were, I don't know, about 100 folks, Cambodian, very, very poor. 2001 in leprous colony, 2,800 lepers live in this colony. And I knew because I want to help them. And we did actually launch a project in leprous colony. Um, when you raise chicken, they grow quickly and they lay eggs. So in terms of rate of return, it's much higher. If you invest $100 in chicken, it could start producing a lot more. Whereas pigs, it is harder to raise and you have to constantly feed them. So the profit margin is smaller initially. So I was at the village and I was asking them, hey, I could give you chicken or I could give you pigs. What do you want? Right? What if I ask that question in USA or farmers in Korea and explain to them you could make more money raising chicken? Obviously, they'll say chicken, but guess what? All the Cambodian farmers, they said, we want pigs. We love pigs. It wasn't based on the capital gain or the profit margin. It was on what they think wealth is. Wealth is owning a couple pigs. So they rather feel wealthy without having less profit than having a lot of chicken running around. Wow. That just blew me out of the water. Like, wow, they really think differently. So positivistic, poor people need money. Chicken can make them money. Poor people need chicken. So this the deduction, isn't it? You have a theory, you have hypothesis, you observe, and you confirm. Well, that theory was blown out of the water because they want pigs. Pigs. The whole axiomatic truth, they poo-poo that. It's like, no, we don't follow that. Nope, they don't follow that logic either, right? What about you? I still want chicken because if it's going to make more profit, right? Because point is that we are wired differently. Okay, so I gave you 15-minute break. So it's now in the hour right now, and we're going to take one more 5-minute break and write your question. Write your question, respond, and then you could answer that question. What say you? Do you want chicken or you want pigs? And why would you say that in your own cultural context? And just a side note, we did all the survey and we end up First of all, there were 2,800 uh, people lived in the lepers colony, and not everybody were leopards, but still a large percentage. And we found out that because they are malnutrition and the leprosy it doesn't get cured, it just stops. It doesn't spread anymore. So for 300 years, the lepers colony was there. So we start giving them chicken. We called it Operation Chicken Run. And we said we buy them $10 worth of chicks. And said if you bring $10 back after raising, selling, make profit, then we're gonna give you a little piglet. So of course, we pass out a lot, but um, some people don't believe us. They ate the chicken, and that's the end of that. But some people actually brought $10 back. So we said, oh, good, and we buy them like $50 piglet, and we promise them if you bring $50 back, then we're gonna buy you a cow, or calf, little baby cow. And some of them did bring $50, so we bought them $200 calf, and using that method, I mean, they start prosper. And within 3 years, according to missionary there, because we were working with the missionary there, that there's only 9 active lepers living the 2,000 Android. And it was just incredible. So all this stuff that I'm telling you is not just philosophical inquiry. It actually has a practical uh, application. So take 5. Welcome back. It's based on the book 2008. Um, it was a fantastic documentary. And as I watch documentary, I capture the image. Do you know how to do that in your computer? Please learn how to do that. My computer is Shift, Command, and 4. Shift, Command, and 4, and it gives you the boundaries, and you could increase and capture the image. So as I was watching this at 2008, wow, that's almost 20 years ago, 18 whatever years ago, I start capturing this thought. In this book, which turned into a documentary, The Difference Between East and the West, William Herbert Sheldon says Westerners want to see the reality and Easterners want to be the reality. Isn't that interesting? The difference between they want to see, observe, analyze. The Eastern to embody, existential. Hmm. And that little difference, completely different. In this book, The Geography of Thought, how Asians and Westerners think differently and why. Interesting book. You ask if if you live in a multinational situation where you have white people, black people, yellow people, green people, you ask, bring this, copy that in color, show him, and said, group it. Did you do that? If you're a white person, Western people, you would have 95% of you or more have grouped panda and monkey together. But if you're Asian from East, you would have grouped monkey and banana. That would be me after living in Asia for a very long time. Why is that? East and West see it completely different. Mm. Because West see collective as East see in oneness. So in West, what they see is they are both animals. But whereas East, no, monkey eats banana. They see more relationally. Okay. Um, this is another project, and I think that, let me just go there. Which spaceship is ahead? What did you write? Which spaceship is ahead? If you were Westerner, that you would have said number 3. If you were Asian, you said number 1. The way that you look at is different. So when we say in Korean, 자신, self, in Japanese, it's jibun. And when it's written in, so, okay, I need to explain. What's the word for self in Korean? It's 자신. But if it's written in Chinese character, 자신, it's actually written as me as a part. So even the self is not the center, but I am part of, right? Me are part of what? That's interesting. The whole self concept is in that. So for example, if I write my name in Korean, understanding, it will be O Robert, last name first, because I'm part of O family. But I write that in English is Robert O. I precede my family. I'm the center. That's interesting, isn't it? So the West is a collection, and I exist within that. Whereas East, the oneness, I in a way disappear. So in Korea, you never say that, hey, let's go play and I'll bring my soccer ball. You will never say that. What? Your soccer ball? You mean our soccer ball? You own it, you pay for it, it's in your house, but you would have to say, let me bring our soccer ball. Why? Because you're part of the whole. I would never call your mother my mother. You said, well, let's go eat. Our mother says, come and eat. That's, that's just how it is. So when you write from Korea, I'll write O Robert, to USA Robert O. But I know it sounds like a silly difference, but no, it's a huge thing. If it's the West, it will be robert.o@gmail. If Google was started in East and somehow, then it would have been gmail.com at o.robert. Yeah, because Robert O family so in that way. East will be Gmail, O, and Robert. Wow. Now this will kind of like blow your way because I studied it and I'm restudying it. And it's just so profound. Lecture 5 we're almost at the lecture 4, but lecture 5. And I'm just setting the stage for how the existentialism, Kierkegaard, came about and how Kierkegaardian philosophy, existentialism, is so close to Eastern thought. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. So you have a chart. There's a whole bunch of words, and you ask any Korean, well, put those words together to make a sentence. There's a word like ate, apple, home, yesterday, I. And of course, he will write, 나는 어제 집에서 사과를 먹었다. What was the words? He would have all these words in Korean and said, make it into a sentence. Then he would have said, 나는 어제 집에서 사과를 먹었다, which means I yesterday at home ate apple 8. It said, huh? What are you talking about? I yesterday at home ate apple 8. What is natural way for English? I ate an apple in my house yesterday. How come the word order changed? Oh, and people just kind of wrote it up as, well, just this different way of speaking. It's just a language issue. No, it's perspective issue. Deeper is philosophical issue. When you're just describing apple ate, 사과를 먹는다, not a problem. You understand. But if you said that apple, I apple eating, no, you have to say I eat an apple. Why is it important? In Korean and English, seeing the world differently, you probably heard that Korean and English have different world orders, and they do. True. But Korean and English differ not only in word of order, they are fundamentally different in how words function, how tenses and verbs operate, and how entities are recognized. In other words, the very structure of the language is completely different. When we say that the structure of language is different, it means that each language perceives the world in a fundamentally different way. Eastern and Western languages, specifically Korean, and I could only say with authority Korean and English because it's only a language that I know with authority. I mean, I study 8 languages. I study Spanish for many years in high school, and then I took German a couple of years in college, and Japanese also in college, and I took classical Greek, biblical Greek, and Hebrew. So I did learn a lot of language. And I was in Russia. They said to learn Russian. And I said, oh, no, no, thank you. I'm in Cambodia for many decades. They say, oh, why don't you learn Khmer, Cambodian? I said, no, thank you. You know, I try 8 languages and I suck at all of them except 2. So I'm not investing any more time learn new language. I'm sorry, you know. So anyway, so yeah, I'm pretty fluent in Korean and English to a level of I could really talk about it at this level. So Eastern and Western language, specifically Korean English, understanding and interpret the world through entirely distinctive lenses. Even something as simple as eating an apple is perceived differently. The difference in perception, understanding, and expression are all embedded in language. Yet we've often overlooked them. We've long assumed that East and West see the world in the same way. But as we've seen in experiments compare East and West, the differing answer between the two weren't just surprising. They point to deeper differences. These aren't radical genetic difference between East and West. They are linguistic. For example, I'm not making a value judgment on, oh, they're evil or they're, no, I'm just saying they have linguistic difference, but that linguistic difference creates a vast major difference. For example, the shift in thinking from Eastern to Western patterns seen in first and third generation immigrants in the US happens largely because of language. Korean and English perceives and understand the world in a fundamentally different ways. So the third generation Korean American, when they are talking to their mom and dad, especially if her language is Korean, the first gen, it's not even language issue. So first gen could learn English well and yet they cannot communicate. Why? I thought you were English major, your English, yeah, but how come I cannot? Because they have different perspective. Let's briefly explore how Korean and English perceive the same situation differently by looking at simple sentence. I ate an apple at home yesterday. First, the Korean worldview understands the world through the lens that all objects and entities are interconnected through relationship. Korean language is relational language. Hmm. And Kierkegaardian philosophy emphasize relationship. So linguistically, Kierkegaard philosophy, although it's written in Danish, translating to English and German, linguistically or conceptually, what he wrote in Danish is close to Korean than Danish. Korean first recognized the relationship surrounding the apple, and this perspective is directly reflected in the language. 아, 책상 위에 사과 literally means on the table, on the top of table, apple. But we can never say that in English. It's apple on the table. Okay. So apple cannot be explained in Korean without talking about the surrounding. Apple is not standing alone in the context of table. No, table is needed. You get to talk about table in order to talk about that particular apple on top of the table. It's in relationship with the table. Thus, we can call the Korean perspective the eye of relationship. This relational viewpoint place the observer's awareness outside of the self in order to understand the entire situation. In fact, even when viewing oneself, the Korean perspective tends to look at from external vantage point. This is something that I just discovered, it just blew me out of the water. Like, wow. So let's follow this relational lens into the world of the Korean language. 나는, 나는 means I. 나는 사과를 먹는다. Apple I eat, right? 나는 actually means I, 나 means I, and 는 is a topical marker. This expresses the subject of the situation or the perceiving self, I. Mm. So without the situation, I don't exist. That's what it means. So when I say 나는, so I exist in the context, eat this apple. English, I eat an apple. So yesterday at home, next, the major relation element in the situation is yesterday. And at home, recognize the first. An apple. Then comes the next relational element, which is the apple. Finally, expression ate appears, showing the relationship between self, I, and the apple. This structure of Korean language happens automatically and unconsciously, allowing brain to process information quickly. When I see apple, I see the context. In fact, when using machine called an eye tracker, which detects eye movements, we can observe that East Asian individuals tend to have eyes that move more constantly toward surroundings compared to Western individuals. Have you noticed when we first came to America, then I'll be talking to somebody and I'll be looking at the surrounding and I'll get yelled at. Focus, young man, focus. Look at my eyes. You disrespect me if you don't look at my eyes, young man, you young Korean man. And I'm like, oh, what? I'm not disrespecting you. I'm just looking at the surrounding because you don't exist by yourself. You exist in the context of surrounding. 나는, I exist in the context of surrounding. You know, yeah, that kind of misunderstanding. And now I'm beginning to understand why I was yelled at when I was young. And then they said, "Oh, are you ADHD?" It's like, "Why are you like constantly looking and surrounding? Do you have some kind of issue?" I'm like, "No, I'm wired that way as Eastern young boy." Anyways, now let's examine the worldview of English. Unlike Korean, the English worldview understand all objects and entities as independently separated from one another. Because of this, things are recognized in the same way regardless of where or how they are positioned. So, for example, if we look at the English word apple, without its article, apple on table, apple in bag, apple that I love. In English, apple itself is recognized first. Then its separation from relation to the surrounding is described. That's why when Western people see monkey and panda, they see, ah, they're together. When Eastern minds see monkey and banana, ah, the monkey is in relationship with the banana. That's why you circle it. But monkey does not have relationship with panda, so you don't circle that way. This perspective is directly reflected in the structure of the English language as well. So Korean would say 책상 위에 사과, or in English, transliterate on table apple. No, it doesn't make sense. 봉지 속의 사과, in bag apple. I love that apple. You see, we said apple that I love, or apple in the bag, apple on the table. So in Korean, apple is recognized last because it cannot be separated from the relation to its surroundings. This relational perspective is reflected in the Korean language. Wow. Do I need to go on? Maybe I need to stop. Maybe I need to go on. The perspective needed to see the world of English can be called the eye of individual object. This objective-centered perspective proceeds the world from inside the object outward. I am the center. Move forward. Let's now follow the English worldview through the lens of the object's eye. I, the first element in the subject. Eight, next comes eight, which express energy or action flowing out of the subject. And apple, which is object that receives this affect energy. In position, follow my house yesterday. The structure of English unfolds its order which the energy or entity flows, where it originates, how it moves, what object it affects, how that object change, and finally positioned or separated from its surrounding. You know, they say, I, you know, I did this, I did that, yeah, right? All English sentence structure follows that flow. This is precisely how native English speakers perceive and make sense of the world, an intuitive structure unconsciously acquired during early childhood as they learn English as their mother tongue. Once you grasp this natural worldview of English, there are no longer a need to memorize different grammar rules because you begin to think and see the way English does. And so it is so difficult for Eastern people to come and try to learn because you have to think opposite, you know, because the Eastern mind watch the apple surrounding, but the Western mind, I am approaching the apple and eating. However, the problem lies in the fact that Korean and English perceive the world entirely different ways. This creates a state of difficulty where comprehension breaks down and the brain simply cannot process it. If the brain does not build cognitive structure for understanding the world of English, then the Korean linguistic framework, which operates quickly and unconsciously, actually becomes an obstacle to understand English. Naturally, this makes English extremely difficult to grasp. So what does that mean? So, well, let's throw out some question. Why Western philosophy cannot be imposed on Eastern mind without linguistic and epistemological contextualization? You know what? I think I don't have time to expand on that. So what I'll be doing is end it there and give you 5 minutes. And then because I gave you already 20-minute break to write something, I'll give you my last final minute break and actually pick up on this whole, this is very profound stuff. So I don't want to rush through that. So Okay, this will be end of lecture 4, and lecture 5 will be something very interesting. In the meantime, start reading all 3 books, but start working on your final paper already. Work it, try to figure out what you're curious about, and this will be research-based paper. So I'm really enjoying learning and teaching this class. So I hope you are having fun as much as I am. See you at the next class.